Now, so what the Bible really presents, you could say in a nutshell, is eyewitness testimony. I know God exists because I've met him. If you ask the average Israelite, how do you know that there's a God? That's the kind of answer that they would give. They'd say, we've seen his mighty works. We've seen him at work amongst us. We've encountered him. The question, though, is can we use eyewitness testimony? If that person has said to you, I don't believe in God because there's no evidence, and if you say, I know God exists because I've met him, they might say, well, that's just... in itself, it's not evidence, it's not proof, is it?
Or to use the words of Dawkins, a person with delusions could say.
Yeah, that's right. So someone who says that they've had an experience, but how do we know that their experience is an experience of God? It could be a delusion. It could be something they ate. It could be a number of things.
Well, I suppose the example you gave of the Israelite, would ordinary Israelites have been talking about them as an individual, or talking about their community? We know what God did in the past. We rescued from Egypt. Most Israelites had not seen a burning bush themselves, or heard God's voice probably. But they knew the stories of what God had done in the past.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so in that sense, it's the eyewitness testimony, but they have reason to believe that that eyewitness testimony that's come from the past is true, and so that's really the challenge for us is. We should be able to say, shouldn't we, I know God exists because I've met him, because it's a personal encounter. But how do we verify that statement is the question.
Do we discount the fact of people in Jesus' day ascribed it to him to be God?
Well, let's look at 1 John 1-3, which I think is touching on that. So John says, that which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we looked upon and have touched with our hands concerning the word of life. The life was made manifest, and we have seen it and testified to it and proclaimed to you the eternal life which was with the Father and was made manifest to us. That which we have seen and heard we proclaim also to you, so that you may have fellowship with us, and indeed our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ. So John is saying this is eyewitness testimony. We have seen the one who has revealed God to us, and we are presenting that eyewitness testimony to you, and he's saying it in a way that they're expected to receive it and believe it. So here is a eyewitness testimony. John is actually saying, I know God exists, to use the modern terminology, but I know who God is, and I know I can talk about who God is and know him because I have heard and seen and looked upon and touched and encountered this God in the person of Jesus.
He's saying it in the plural, not just himself alone.
That's right, yeah. So there are multiple witnesses. Yes, referring there to the apostles and the others. So biblically, knowing God isn't subjectivism. It's not just, I've had this experience, therefore God exists. But it's an experience that provides answers to the dilemmas that philosophy can only speculate on. So that the contention of the scriptures and particularly of the New Testament is that our eyewitness encounter with God hasn't just proven that God exists. It has actually revealed to us who God is. We've come to know him, and through Jesus Christ, all of those questions where the rubber hits the road for human beings, like who am I, how do I relate to people, what's my purpose, why is there evil, and is there anything being done about evil and suffering, those answers too are answered in the way that the Bible would answer this question, is there evidence for God? So we're going to go through what we could say is the biblical argument, a biblical response to, is there evidence for the existence of God? So let's look at Romans 1, 18 to 21. Can someone read that for us?
The wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world in the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. For although they knew God, they did not honour him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened.
Okay, now as we look at these biblical responses, they might sound to some degree similar to some of those philosophical arguments. Right? So this might sound a bit like the cosmological argument, or maybe the teleological argument. The fact that the world exists means there must be a God, or the way that things are as we look at them point to an intelligent designer. But it's much more than that, because remember, the biblical framework isn't does God exist or not, but who is God, what is God like, and can we actually know this God, is the fundamental question that's been asked. Now, the first thing to notice is that the basic problem with people not knowing God is sin. The wrath of God is revealed against ungodliness and unrighteousness. So God's response is not, you guys are ignorant, you need more education. It is, you people are sinners, something needs to be done about your sin. So God isn't not known by people because he's unknowable. The problem is at our end, and it's not just that we are unable to know God, but we are also unwilling to know God, which is the heart of sin. Ungodliness and unrighteousness is our unwillingness to acknowledge God, which we'll see in a moment. We're told in verse 19 that what can be known about God is plain to them. The word there for plain is the word that means shining. In other words, it's shining out. It's like a bright light in the darkness. So we know God, and we know who God is, not by human deduction, not by science or philosophy, but by revelation as it's shone to us, as the light is shone into our eyes. Verse 20, some things have been clearly perceived. What is it that has been clearly perceived? What that means, that phrase means, is not merely that God exists, but we see that it is actually his invisible attributes that are clearly perceived. In other words, what is normally invisible has now been made visible, has been made known. God is not hiding himself. He's actually making himself visible in the creation. What are the two things that are clearly perceived? Well, the first one he says is eternal power. So we might say, well, his ability to create, his ability to sustain the universe, his ability to be at work in the universe, just the incredible forces of nature that we just say, oh, well, why is there thunder and lightning? Why are there earthquakes? Why are there all these things? And we say, oh, it's the forces of nature. But the Bible says, actually, no, God has designed the world in such a way that those things in what we call nature are actually displays of his power, that he is the God who is sustaining and at work in this creation that he's made. What's the second thing? His divine nature, literally his godness. So in all that's been made, in all of the things that are happening in creation, God has shown, is clearly perceived that he is there and that he is God. And so as a result, what does he say? They, meaning the men who suppress the truth, which is actually a reference to all of humanity, are without excuse. No one can say, I did not know that there is a God. And I did not know that this God who created the universe has divine power and is actually God, as in God the creator rather than just a spiritual force or being. What is it they have no excuse? What is it that we have not done? What is required of the creature in relation to the creator? Well, honour him as God. So recognise his divine power and his eternal power and his divine nature. So honour him as God. So God in creation makes it known that he is a God worthy of glory and honour and worship. Right? And that is clearly perceived, we're told, in creation alone, that God deserves honour and worship. And God deserves thanks, which I guess brings it to the honour and worship is kind of the reverence and fear, but thanks is a relational thing ultimately, isn't it? Thanking God for our own existence, the fact that he made us, for his provision of all the good things that we have in creation. Let's look at another passage that I would say employs this same kind of approach, and it's Acts 17, 22 to 28. Can someone read that for us?
Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. And as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring."
Okay, thanks, Eric. So the first passage in Romans, Paul is speaking probably primarily to Jews. Okay, here he's speaking probably 100% to complete pagans who probably have absolutely no knowledge of the Jewish religion or the Jewish scriptures. The people that he's speaking to are Greek philosophers who all have their theories on the existence and the nature of God or the gods. So there were the Stoics, and the Stoics said that God is indifferent to humanity because ultimately God is impersonal. They saw God as just an impersonal force or principle that governed the universe rather than a personal being. Then the Epicureans were the other philosophers, and they believe that there are gods, but the gods live in another realm of existence and are actually completely unaware of humanity. So both the Stoics and the Epicureans had this concept of God, if there is one, distant, unapproachable, unknowable, and not personal. The other people that are being addressed were just the general Athenians. And the popular Athenian religion, Paul says, I see you are very religious. The best that they could come up with was this altar to an unknown God. So they had this sense of there is something, a God out there beyond or other than all these gods that we have here in Athens, but it's a God that we can't know, the unknown or unknowable God.
There is a story about that they prayed to this unknown God in case none of these other ones would work. They prayed to the God they didn't know, and a plague was stopped. And so they made an altar to it. So
yeah, and they were told by one of the guys that Paul actually quotes here that they were to sacrifice sheep to this unknown God. And so that's Paul's picking up on that. He would have known that story, and that's why he says, what you worship is unknown, this I proclaim to you. So he's actually, I think what he's actually saying is what you people experienced 500 years ago with this encounter with this unknown God, that was actually the true God who was preparing you to hear this message that I'm going to give you today. So this isn't a case of does God exist or not. This is a case of I'm in this city where there's altars abounding, every god that they can collect. The question is, well, actually, who is the true God?
We've got the opposite apologetic task. It's saying that apart from this unknown God, all those other gods are nothing to worry about.
Yeah, in that sense. Yeah, like Richard Dawkins said, we no longer believe in these gods. But remember what Paul said in Romans, that actually deep down people, he says, even though they knew God, in other words, they knew of God. So deep within every human being, it's the truth of God's reality is there. That's why you have to suppress it. Right? You don't have to suppress something that doesn't exist. So you have to suppress the knowledge of God in you to be able to say there is no God. So see how Paul picks up again on this idea of God as the creator. So he gives life to mankind and breath and everything. So he's creating, sustaining the world and humanity and making himself known in that way. And even then within humanity and civilization determined the allotted periods and the boundaries of nations and civilizations. And Paul is saying all of that is why. The reason why you have no excuse, he's doing that so that they should seek God and feel their way towards him. So God has revealed enough just in his creation and providence of the world and of humanity to give every human being enough reason to know he's there and to seek to find him and know him. But of course, the Athenians hadn't, had they? They were still in ignorance. So the problem is not the unknowability of God, the problem is human sin. that brings us into darkness and futility and ignorance. Let's pause and have a break there, and we'll do the rest after the break. And there will be time, God willing, for you to have a bit of discussion and prayer around the tables. But we'll just have a pause for 10 or 15 minutes. Okay. So, the biblical argument from creation doesn't prove God exists. We can't strictly say it's kind of a philosophical evidence for God's existence, but it does communicate the truth that God is and who God is, enough for anyone, any person, no matter what their background, religious or non-religious, to actually hear these statements, and it will resonate with them as a human being. They will know that this is true, even if they are denying it and suppressing it. It's enough to show that God is your creator, and He demands that you acknowledge Him and honour Him and thank Him and seek Him and want to know Him.